Get started with a project management workshop. Uh, this workshop will be part of a series and we'll be focusing on the basics of project management. My name is Brian Reyes. I'm a PMP, which is a project management professional. It's a certification. It's one of two certifications you can obtain in project management offered by the Project Management Institute. Like I said, this workshop will be focused on the basics. So if you have any questions that are more in depth, I will endeavor to answer them as the best I can. So let's get started. So to start things off, we need to define what a project is. So there are many things that we can do for a business, be it doing our everyday tasks, doing data entry, answering phone calls, or meeting with different people. But in order for them to qualify as a project, there are two things that need to be absolutely true. It has to have a clear beginning and end, and it has to have clearly defined, realizable goals. If you start with a project and we keep extending the deadline 1 month over, 2 months over, maybe a year, that's already becoming day-to-day operations. So that's already, it's a little hazy whether that continues to be a project. The other one is the goals. If we start off with a project, say the absolute simplest thing, you're trying to build an office, like your office, and this is already extending to the whole revamp of your house, then that's already not the goal you started out with. That's something we need to be very careful of. So there are many people associated with projects, specifically for the project manager's interest. The group of people that we need to pay attention to starts off with the project manager themselves. Project manager could be referred to as a project coordinator, depending on the structure of the organization. Usually, project managers will have some degree of financial authority, but this is not always the case. If your role, though, is of a project coordinator, you definitely will not have financial authority. You will still have most of the administrative responsibilities, and they might be shared with your local area manager. Project manager or coordinator is usually just one person. And I don't mean it's one person through the entirety of the project. That one person could change. And I also don't mean that it's just one project manager. Depending on the size of the projects, you could have one project manager and multiple project coordinators, or you could have multiple project managers, each focused on one portion of the project. So you could have a project manager focused only on HR and a different one focused solely on the financial procurement of the projects. This will change depending on the scale of the project. The main goal of the project managers is to keep the project moving forward. That doesn't mean that you have to be exactly on the deadline. It just means that your main job is to avoid stalling at all costs. So if you are below your usual level of manpower, then you need to find temporary workers. If you are out of funds, or you will be out of funds, then you need to try and see where you can cut costs without affecting performance, and so on. Because your main job is to keep moving forward, it goes to show that you need to be coordinating all activities. At the very least, you need to be informed of all the activities so that you can keep all of them in one place. That way, if there's a question or if there's a series of activities that need to take place, you already know which have already happened, which will happen, and you can plan around that. Once you already have that, then you can continue on to the next point, which is tracking the progress and budget if you have financial authority. Because you have to coordinate everything that happens in the project, or most of it, you need to know how far along every section is. So if you're going back to the building your own office example, then you don't want to order all of your furniture to arrive in a certain day when you haven't even scheduled painters to try and prime and paint your office. Otherwise, that'll get all over your furniture. The other person that is of a lot of interest in a project group is called a project sponsor. The project sponsor is not always the person that gives you the funds for the project, but it is one of the key people or group of people that want the project to succeed. Could be a principal investigator, it could be just an area manager, or it could be a group in a community that really needs your project to keep going. They can help you define goals, set milestones, and overall manage the engagement that the community or group can have in your project. Another important aspect is that they can authorize or deny or decline changes to your project. That doesn't always apply to the project manager themselves. For example, since they manage community groups as well, if the community has a proposed change, they can stop it before it reaches the project management team or the project manager themselves. That function can save the team a lot of work in the long run. Another thing is that in the case, for example, that you do not have complete administrative authority or financial authority, it would then be the sponsor's responsibility to go beyond your authority. In the case of a PI or a principal investigator, then you would engage them to see if they can solve the problems that you yourself cannot. So they could get additional graduate students, they could re-coordinate their activities to try and reinforce the goal that you're trying to speed up. The other one, and this one is a bit of generalized, is the entire team itself. The entire team isn't everyone associated with a particular activity. It's actually, or usually, the leadership or main components of those groups. So for example, if you are trying to do the office refurbishing project, then you wouldn't include all the painters. You wouldn't include everyone that you need a permit from in the area. You would include yourself, if you are the project manager, your sponsor, the building manager, and maybe the person in charge of the painters. And that would be the team that you work with. They will also be the ones that will actually be performing a lot of the work. One very large misconception about project management is that the project manager needs to be skilled in all the areas that the team is skilled in. And that is often never the case. If you are functioning as a project manager, it is more of a support role to everyone else. So sometimes you will not be familiar with their work. That's why a big part of the job is to ask as many questions as you can. Your team, not yourself, are the subject matter experts. You coordinate with all the subject matter experts in the activities that they are experts in. So to continue, project management is divided in 5 phases. In this workshop, we will only be touching on 2 of them, but just so everyone is aware, project management is divided in initiation, which is largely the why are we doing this project. It's where we meet with our sponsors, meet with different stakeholders, which are people that have an interest in our project. We meet with regulating agencies that could have an effect, and we try to get everyone on board on defining goals. Next one is planning, which is after we have everything ready to go, then we start detailing on what is everyone going to do. Execution is when we are actually performing the activities that we planned. And monitoring or control are how are we doing in our execution? Have we actually reached something we can call the end, or do we need to go back? And closing is when we have everything already finished, then we would go and document everything we have learned. These 5 phases don't always happen in this exact order. Initiation will always happen first because we need permits, but planning, execution, and control can happen all throughout the project. Oftentimes, when we plan something and we are executing, we realize that we missed an important aspect of the project, and so we have to go back to planning. Or we could have the entire project almost done and we have a deliverable product, but when we're monitoring, we figured out there's something we can do to improve its functioning, say 10%. Then we're back to planning. We do not go into closing until we are actually at a point we can hand off the project and document all the work. So this is initiation. And initiation, we want to identify a need. We want to know if we actually have staff, money, or time available for this project, taking into account everything else that we're doing in the organization or group. We need to know if this project actually fits the vision of our organization. We're trying to do something that's environmentally friendly, but we're using large amounts of fuel, then maybe there's something else we can do. And a very important thing that needs to be outlined from the start is when do you know you are done? When do you know your project has been successful or failed? That's called the definition of done. So one thing you're probably largely familiar with is an affinity diagram, which is the result of your brainstorming sessions. Usually when we brainstorm, we're just throwing ideas. All of these ideas can then be grouped together into meaningful qualities. So if we have a lot of these ideas related to the budget, then we will group them up in budget and then describe them within a diagram. That would also apply for every other category we come up during our brainstorming session. So planning, like I said, is the what of our project. We need to find out what needs to get done to achieve the project goals. What are our resources? What are our communications information? And that'll tell us what our bottlenecks will be. We need to know who's responsible for what and how their involvement will affect us. And we also need to know, we need to outline a work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure is particularly important because we need to have a description for what needs to happen. If we have a 5-year project, we need to know what everyone is going to be doing in those 5 years. Work breakdown structures are not an overview of the work. They're actually the work divided into the smallest possible tasks. So that way you really can understand what everyone is doing at that point in time. This is an example of a work breakdown structure of an incorrect one. We're starting out trying to make a robotics and Python curriculum, and we divided it in 3 different phases. We need to train the staff, because otherwise they won't be able to actually run the course. We need to test and see how our volunteers that don't know anything perform before and after the course. Then we need to review and see if our course needs any changes. So for the staff, we would then begin by evaluating their current skills, train them, and have them perform mock classes for our curriculum. After they're done, we reassess and see whether they meet our criteria for actually performing the course, and we begin testing with different volunteers, which we would give a diagnostic test to measure their engagement level or understanding before and after the class. So, not sure if anyone would know, but what could be expanded about this work breakdown structure? What would be something that you could add? Because like I said, this is an incorrect one. But one thing we could add about this work breakdown structure is how we're going to give our mock classes, how we're going to evaluate their training, and how we're going to reassess them. Everything that we're doing has to be described to the smallest level of detail. So for example, you could go down to the point of a workday. If you're having them, the staff, take the evaluation one day, then you can describe that as your day. And from then you keep going. This can vary depending on the size or length of your project. Now, this is what I mentioned before about needing to know who's responsible for what. That's usually called a Darcy matrix, which is actually just a table. In that table, you need to know who's responsible for the decisions and how to contact them, who's accountable for those decisions, so who do those decisions affect, who's responsible for tasks in your work breakdown structure, who is consulted, and who is informed. These are all levels of responsibility. If someone needs to be informed, I only need to give them, for example, a report once a week. I do not need to ask them what they think about the decision that we're taking in the project. If someone is consulted, then I do want their opinion. But I'm taking their opinion with a grain of salt because they're not someone that I can hold accountable for what they're saying. If someone is a decider in our project, then you want any and all input you can get from that person, and it will be a much heavier opinion because they're the ones that will give you the final yes or no. And this continues like that. Usually, when we make a Darcy matrix, we want any and all forms of contacting them being in one place so that we don't have to go looking for documents everywhere.